Welcome all. I'm so glad to see so many people, some of whom I know, some of whom I don't know. And I pass this to you, Susan Fitzmaurice. Tell us about Judi's Room and love you, lead on.
So Judi's Room came out of something that was done in the 30th anniversary of the ADA. I did 90 days of events, and we had a day that was dedicated to Judi, and it was hugely popular, and people wanted to know more about her. They wanted to know more about the, the issues that we brought up were issues that Judi Chamberlin championed, and just are not necessarily topics that are discussed in sort of typical disability circles. And so we decided that we really needed to do something on an ongoing basis. And so we decided to do something the first Wednesday of each month. And after we did that for a couple of months, then MindFreedom decided to join in and be our co-hosts. And we've been doing it now for about 3.5 years. And we have probably about 50% of the people who come fairly regularly. And there's actually a few people that are almost here every single time. And then we have a lot of people who drop in once and then we never see them again. And everybody's welcome. You know, you don't need to make a commitment in order to be here. Just be here for the time that you're here. And it's a safe place. That's one of the important things about this space, is it is a safe space. So you can say what you want to say, and hopefully people will honor confidentiality when the need arises.
Thank you. And I think we're going to pass it to Christina Cap, KK.
Thank you, Susan. I greatly appreciate it. Um, it is such an awesome. I would say this is an awesome endeavor. Where we really did come together. We are bringing together lots of voices from, partnering with I Love You Lead On across disability, but getting the conversation and having the authentic conversation. And I think it's something that's so needed. And I'm just really want to thank you all for being here. Um, as some of you know, Mind Freedom, our mission statement is in a spirit of mutual cooperation. Mind Freedom International aims to lead a nonviolent uh, revolution of freedom, equality, truth, and human rights within and mental health care, and unite psych psychiatric survivors internationally, consumers, allies, and just all individuals, whether they're allies and across the globe, for justice everywhere. And that's, in platforms like this, even just start to continue the cultivation of the dialogue, because I think rights have been so left out of the conversation of late. So I'd say more than ever, we need to really come together under the unified front. And I just really want to thank Mr. Coleman for being here today. And I'm going to now just drop his website in the chat, like I told him I would, so that you guys can all just click on it and maybe get some additional information on him. But Dr. Lee Coleman, we're delighted to have him. Is a retired psychologist who has devoted himself to public information, exposing individuals and public to harms of today's mental health industry. And he seeks to support grassroots movement to abolish forced treatment and proves tools to be amplified on voices of those who want to make change. This is a man of our hearts, I would say. He has authored a book, The Reign of Error, Psychiatric Authority and Law. We thank you for being here, Mr. Coleman. We are so grateful, and the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, I will just make one correction. I'm a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. That is important because psychiatrists, they don't deserve to be the leaders in anything to do with helping people with emotional problems.
My
But
apologies.
they do, that's all right. They do have a role to play, but it's a relatively minor one, as I will explain. And I'm very happy to be here as well. I actually am probably the oldest person in this group today. I'm going to be 86 in just a couple of weeks. So I remember Judi Chamberlin. I remember reading her book, and what a powerful statement it was. So the first group of, similar to you people, was the net that I came in contact with, was the Network Against Psychiatric Assault in San Francisco. I live in Berkeley. And so I became very good friends with people like Leonard Frank. I think some of you will remember him or heard about him. And people like Wade Hudson, Steve Chabosinski, who was an attorney. I also remember that some people, and I think this is true for groups like we were talking about, some people, for good reason, have so much emotion about what psychiatry has done to them, could hardly believe that I was really the friend. And I've had experiences where people just would not hear it. I don't think that's going to happen here, but I don't care if it happens. It will simply be a way to take it to the next step. All right. So what I want to do is explain, first of all, my book. I wrote it in '84, and it was called The Reign of Error, with the subtitle Psychiatry, Authority, and Law. And the reason I said it that way is, first of all, the reign has to do with the law, the power of the state, kind of like the reign of terror after the French Revolution. And so my main message was that, and then the error had to do with the fact that psychiatry is nothing but error, which I'm going to go into in some detail. So what I was trying to get across there, and what I want to get across here, is the problem is not so simple as that psychiatry is the only enemy. There's actually two enemies. Psychiatry is one of them. The other one is society. That's why you notice my website is called Psychiatry and Society. Now, what I mean by that is society is using society is using psychiatry for its ends, what it wants to do, so that they take the easy way out of problems like suicide, violence, predicting someone's behavior, who's responsible for this or that. They want to foist it on the psychiatrists so that society doesn't have to do the hard work of deciding what's the right thing. How do we promote justice? And at the same time, we have society's needs, which are legitimate. So the problem is a kind of an unholy alliance between psychiatry and society. So in what I want to do today, I want to help you realize that and use it when you engage with people who you want to try to persuade that our point of view is what they need to adopt. Think of me as kind of like your valet. I'm going to put on your outfit to do battle with these people. Do battle meaning conversation and so forth. So let me give you some examples of the kind of power that I'm talking about and how society and psychiatry are engaged in this alliance. Let's take the issue of forced treatment of people who have emotional or behavioral problems. Of course, as you've heard me say, I am against forced treatment for any reason. Any time a person has a problem which society has to engage in, if it requires force, that should go into the criminal justice system. because there are legal protections, at least in theory. And so there's no forced treatment in my recommendations. But things like also punishment for people who have committed crimes. Psychiatry gets involved in that, legal insanity and so forth. Conservatorships, sometimes people are simply unable to take care of themselves, but then psychiatry doesn't have any way of judging that. Decisions about parole and so forth, many other things like that. So all of this is based on the presumption that psychiatry has tools that society needs, that we know how to measure what mental health problem you have. We know how to measure whether you're dangerous or not. We don't. All these topics, as I'm going to say at the end, I want you to go to my website because I have about 50 20-minute presentations on every one of these topics. So let me do that by comparing psychiatry with legitimate medicine. Psychiatry is not legitimate medicine, as I discovered way back, even before my psychiatry residency, when I was just a medical student. And the presumption that psychiatry knows how to treat like other doctors do. Okay, let's talk about diagnosis. Let me just stop there a minute and say, am I making myself clear so far? Okay, all right. Okay, right away, when I was in medical school, I could immediately see this is psychiatry, it's not medicine. We were given patients to follow very early on in medical school. Actually, we were assigned a pregnant mother, and who was not having any medical problems, not having any emotional problems, just meet with the father and the mother and talk about how the pregnancy was going, if there was any issues emotionally, whatever, and then follow up a little bit. So right from the beginning, the difference was that psychiatrists didn't discover any disorder that they could test for. They simply, like, for example, let's say it was a child. I happen to also be a child psychiatrist. Let's say the child is not reading well. They would decide that the child's diagnosis was dyslexia. Now, what is dyslexia? That's either Latin or, I guess, Latin, Greek, for problem reading. Or if you say someone has depressive disorder, do we need a psychiatrist to tell us that you're depressed? Either you are or you're not. So psychiatry doesn't diagnose anybody. And then the other thing is that it doesn't treat anybody, because emotional and behavioral problems have never been found to have a biological substrate. Whether it's psychosis, that's a real thing. People flip out. Whether it's manic depression, that's a real thing. Whether it's anxiety, addiction to drugs, whatever it is, there has never been any correspondence between those behaviors and feelings and some kind of a medical finding. But of course, a huge topic is the horrible explosion of biological and neurochemical and neuroelectric claims by the psychiatry industry. It's all BS. It's never been demonstrated. There are neurological conditions which may mimic an emotional problem, and for that, we either need a neurologist or a psychiatrist who has the medical training to sometimes help us distinguish. But in all but a very tiny percentage of those problems, there simply is no connection that psychiatry can make, that unlike medicine, which really can. Okay. So when I want to go now into my career a little bit. and talk a little bit about the fact that I have happened to have a very wide experience because of the way my career evolved. Initially, when I finished my residency, and then I had to do 2 years in the military where I was on the psychiatric staff of the Air Force Academy. And then I came out to California after an initial year with the Kaiser mental health system. I got the job I really wanted, was with the county mental health system in Marin County. And I was the head of the crisis unit, a team of about 10 people, psych aides, nurses, psychologists, and as a psychiatrist, I was supposed to be the chief. That's when I first began to really realize that I didn't agree with forced treatment. When I was a resident, I gradually started not liking. I didn't see people trying to get escape, and staff were chasing them down. And I said, shit, I'm not going to do that. And so I just sat there and see what happened. I couldn't do anything to stop it. As a resident, nobody was going to give me the power to decide. But I began to see things which made it obvious that we shouldn't be doing this, and why we shouldn't be doing it. First of all, I would see people being brought in on 72-hour holds, which I think most of you know is either danger to self, danger to others, or incapable of taking care of your food, clothing, and shelter. And over and over again, you'd see people who didn't meet any of those, but the police simply came across somebody, or a family maybe called them, and they could see there was a problem, but they would simply check a box which would make it legal. And then we were supposed to evaluate them, and then most of the time they wouldn't stay that long, and then we would make a referral somewhere. But that's where I gradually came to the point to think about it more deeply, began working on my book, and basically could see no forced treatment. This is, and I remember seeing shock treatment, what an outrage that was. So the next thing that then happened is I began to be doing a lot of media work where we had a lot of political things going on in the prisons of California. There were a lot of things going on. And I began to do a lot of media presentations, because when the media gets these things like a judge was shot in a Marin County courthouse and stuff maybe most of you don't remember. But I began to see that this needed a systematic approach, that psychiatry could not treat things because there was nothing to treat that was medical. And then I began to also then get in touch with the work of some other people that I want to pass along here. All of you should read Robert Whitaker's books. That's with one T. He did Mad in America, which is his first book, which documented the fact that mental patients were receiving forced treatment every bit as much as they ever were, but they were just not staying as long. And then psychiatry was claiming, oh, it's the drugs that did it. And that's what helped him to get better. Well, he exposed all of that. And then in the next book, called, let's see, the title was, I forget the title, but if you look up Robert Whitaker's book, you'll find a second one, and not the one with his wife, Lisa Cosgrove, but the second one.
I'll jump in here. Anatomy of an Illness, I think.
Anatomy of an Epidemic.
There you go. There you go.
Epidemic. All right. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you.
Epidemic.
Okay. So let me talk then about the treatments. It's not simply that the treatments don't work, which is what you'd expect, because there's no substrate that you can find what the illness. It's not a medically based problem. The brain is way too complicated to say we can show by some sort of fMRI or scan, and they make these claims that you can see this and see that. It's all baloney. but they are actually harming the brain. So when people get forced treatment, it's really a rape. I wrote an article called The Crimes of Psychiatry for not a very magazine I would necessarily recommend, but one of Larry Flint's publications called, I think it was Chic. You know, I will publish for whoever wants my stuff. I don't have to like everything else that they're doing. So basically, and Peter Bregan did a lot of work on this, all psychiatric drugs work, in fact, all psychiatric treatments work by interfering with the brain, damaging the brain. And if you read especially the work of Whitaker and Peter Gutje in Denmark, they have a lot of documentation about the harms that the drugs are doing. You should know that psychiatric drugs are addicting, and getting off of them has to be done very carefully, very slowly, because the brain reacts in such a way that it tries to compensate. And then when you try to get off too fast, you can end up with a syndrome that can be misidentified by psychiatry as though it's your original illness, and say, well, that just shows you need to take more of the drugs. Okay. So the answer is we need to abolish forced treatment. We need to abolish all the psychiatric inputs in various kinds of mental health legal programs. And we need to do something different. So let me finish off by giving you my point of view about what the mental health system would look like. First of all, I'm not one of these people who deny the reality of psychosis or any mental problem. The person knows whether they have a problem. Most people want help. They're not against getting help as long as they're not abused in the process. There used to be people that I remember in the early 70s, consumers, who would say, well, the problem is a sick society. Well, maybe it is. In these days of our political life, it is pretty sick. But the problems are real. People are in pain. They deserve help. And the way to do it is we would have multidisciplinary teams that might include a psychiatrist in very few situations, but they would never be the head of the team. They don't have the skills to do most of the things that are needed. They would be counterproductive. Occasionally, when you're trying to decide whether a problem is neurologically based or mental, they might be helpful. But the head of the team would be headed up by people who did have some training. You know, it's not good enough to just anybody do this. You have to have gone through some sort of program to learn about drugs, learn about, because by the way, I'm not saying a person should never take any drugs. If a person's taken them, they feel it's helping, and they've been given a chance to consent or not, that's between them and their helpers. This team would basically have the ability, they would have a physical space where a person could go at what we call a real asylum, not the old-fashioned asylums, but the word asylum means a safe place. These people, that means that if the problem was serious enough that they could not go back to where they normally lived, didn't have family that would support them or whatever, that they could stay there. And they would receive the kind of help, which might be getting a job, getting some money to help them pay for whatever they need, some counseling, if that's what it is. You know, I hear these discussions about, oh, it's so hard to get the money to pay for the psychiatrist. You know how many qualified caretakers could be paid with what it takes to the salary of one psychiatrist to do a worse job than you would do. So and I would say, let's just take the example of suicide. I would predict that we would be ahead of the game. Psychiatry loves to tell us that if we didn't have forced treatment, if we didn't have psychiatry, we would have a great increase in society of suicide. And I say, how many people have committed suicide out of fear of psychiatry? Fear of the drugs, fear of electric shock, fear of lockup, fear of the stigma. And by the way, the best discussion I've ever heard on what psychiatry does with its diagnostic labels is Laura Delano. And on her YouTube channel, after she got some grants and she did it again, I didn't like it quite as much as her original one, and it was called The Power of Psychiatric Diagnosis. And she pointed out in the most eloquent way that when you get a psychiatric diagnosis, it becomes who you are. You never say to somebody, you are cancer. But we do say, you are schizophrenic. And that label gets written down. It follows you the rest of your life. And I've never yet seen a psychiatrist who looks at a record and sees that who doesn't say psychiatry in remission. Now, how the hell you can have something in remission which you can't prove that it exists in the first place? Okay, I think I'm ready to listen to what people say and answer questions. Have somebody chew me out for not saying what I should say, whatever it is.
Actually, I think you spoke to all of our hearts very much so, because I mean, as an individual that has actually experienced shock treatment, the way you describe it and is just so on point. So I just want to thank you. And there should be no force of any kind. And that word should be totally taken out. I just thank you for coming and sharing with us. I'm going to just kind of open it up to questions, to conversation. How about we do the questions for Dr. Coleman first, so that if he needs to, excuse himself, we can keep the conversation going. But if you have a question, maybe raise your hand, and Susan and Susan Fitz, we will get to you. And I just thank you again, Mr. Coleman. That was phenomenal. I think you spoke to a lot of our hearts. I'm going to put your website in the chat yet again so that everybody can get linked. Is anybody seeing any hands?
I can't figure out. This is Eddie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I
Yes.
cannot figure out how to work this on my phone. I usually am on the computer, so I just thought I would jump in before I get out of the car. I have a question about the DSM 5 and its availability or lack thereof online, because Google was effectively disabled about 5 years ago. It's hard to say what should or shouldn't be available, but I think I noticed that this before that happened, and that is that it's proprietary information. And this is my question, actually. Is it that it's proprietary information, so you cannot go online and see the diagnostic criteria, and how insane that is for like, if you're, is that correct?
I don't really know. I haven't bothered to keep up with all these DSM editions.
Oh my God.
Because I know that once it was a fraud from the beginning. Once they started the effort to change the diagnostic labels, I guess it was 3, and they began to have these meetings. I forget the psychiatrist now who headed that up, but it was basically supposed to be, well, we understand that our diagnostic labels need to be made more uniform. And so we're going to have meetings and we're going to have criteria. And so it's all going to be scientific. And it's complete bullshit because, you know, garbage plus garbage plus garbage still adds up to garbage. And the whole concept of diagnosis in psychiatry is a fraud. I did touch on that. But you can't, psychiatrists only label the behaviors which are already known. I mean, here's what should happen. You go in and you say, doctor, you know, I don't feel very good. My sex drive is down. I'm suicidal, blah, blah, blah. And they say, well, you're depressed. You have depressive disorder.
Yeah.
What the patient should say back, yes, doctor, I know, I told you all that. What's causing it? And the doctor, well, let me, and here's the other problem is, it isn't just that the label's meaningless, but the book then will, the DSM will tell the doctor what it is you're supposed to do. Now, when the doctor looks there and he sees depressive disorder, it's going to say, put on antidepressants. Well, that's bad enough because that probably isn't going to do you any good, not really. And then it'll say, if its problem still persists, shot treatment. So
Yeah.
the fact that the labels are worthless is just the beginning of the problem. It's what they're going to do to you as a result of it. And it'll keep it on you for the rest of your life. And
Yeah.
also what it does to your self-esteem.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm very well aware that it's a crock of poo, but I guess my question was, it's like the ICD, the diagnostic manual for the other, you know, everything else is, I mean, people have to have it as if it were public information, even if it is. This is the handbook that the industry works with. I say it's a guide to how to act like a, you know,
well, are you talking?
cisgender male wasp individual.
Dr. Chet,
But
who's also one of our participants, says the DSM criteria are available. And maybe, Doctor, if you put that in the chat, we could figure out how to find it. And I don't know if that
okay, so I was
it's there.
mistaken.
No. The problem is what you're saying. It's bogus anyway, right? So, but we have some hands up, and I see.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No. I just wanted to point you to the chat. I don't know if you're able.
I can't see the chat because
That's what I'm
I
telling
can't
you.
figure this out.
So, Dr. Chetlos, who's a participant here, and maybe you'll speak up, sir. I don't know who you are, but you anyway. That there it is online. I'm not sure how to access it. So
I can speak up. You can Google DSM and put in any diagnosis that might be in DSM, and you'll find a couple of sites. Several of them are governmental sites, so it's the National Institute of Health. So it is readily available.
Okay.
online.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. And then I see we have a hand from Yvonne Smith, and then Amy C. I love you. I haven't seen you in a while, or you either, Yvonne. So yeah.
I'll go ahead. I want to ask this question. I had one hospitalization like 30 years ago, and I needed it. I got a lot of care, but I haven't had a hospitalization since then. I've gone on to live a productive life. I haven't had medication since like 2008. I still see a psychiatrist, and I switched providers from a hospital setting to a community setting for primary care because more of my issues had to do with diabetes and those kind of things. Then all of a sudden, I noticed in the last couple of months on my summary notes, it had bipolar. How do I get that taken off? I asked my psychiatrist. He says, well, you don't have bipolar 1, or whatever else. And I consider myself to be a person who actually has recovered. Now, that doesn't mean if I recently had a death a few months ago that my sister died, that I don't have some emotional upset, but it's what most people have had in their life. How does a person go about getting them to stop putting those diagnoses? Because I went from a long time and without seeing that up. Every time I want to go on a senior trip or something, they want a doctor's clearance or whatever. And I just got that, and I'm thinking about changing my primary care doctor just because of that. And I want to tell her that. That would be the reason why I'm switching to another primary care provider, is because I don't want that label on me. Thank you. I'm letting my plane.
So
Listening for your.
once you get the label, it never goes away. It's horrifying. Dr. Coleman, do you have something you want to say to
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, let's see if maybe we can try to do it. Okay, definitely find somebody else. Try to find somebody. It has to be a psychiatrist because they have the power, one fight to fight the other. Okay, try to find somebody who agrees with us, maybe not everything, but some who realizes that these labels are not what they're supposed to be and that it's hurting you. And then say, doctor, I would consider it a very important thing as part of the help you're giving me right now. If you would be in touch with those doctors who are putting it on me and explain what I've told you, I'm speaking for you now, what you say, I've told you, this is what was going on in my life. Why does that classify as a mental disorder? That's life. And I'm handling it. And this is hurting me. Would you please do that? If you find somebody who they may not be able to get it changed, but they might be able to. And you have a right to your records. Get those records and see whether
My psychiatrist agrees. He says anything if I have some mild anxiety now, and he says, well, they didn't get that from me. So
yeah. Well, see,
what is the method to approach the primary care doctor, or to have because the psychiatrist hasn't shared notes or anything with the
well,
although I'm a public person where I live, and I don't always, but I do say that I'm a person who has a psychiatric survivor. So
yeah. Well, I think if you can get a psychiatrist would be best, because that psychiatrist, just like you have a right to your records, you have a right to send your records to any other doctor or any person for that matter. So if that doctor gets the records and concludes that they don't have a basis and that therefore he is requesting that those be a note be made that that is no longer considered to be a valid concern, and they can't erase it necessarily, but they can make a record which you then could use if somebody tries to do something to you that you don't want.
okay, thank you. That's been my psychiatrist for the last 35 years. Thank you. I will. We had this conversation not about expungement, but that I was upset about the diagnosis being deep down in the summary of the primary care doctor.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
if you weren't upset, then you'd have another problem. I'm glad you're upset. You should be.
Thank you.
That's the problem. The records never go away. And I don't even know how to fix that. But I know Amy's been very patient with your hand up. I want to give you a chance.
Oh, no, you're doing just fine. And we all have to share and be patient. I just want to thank you, Dr. Coleman, and for MindFreedom, and all of you for being here and sharing your chats and the truth. And I just want to
It's breaking up.
validate it and to bring into the conversation that just a little bit system does turn us against families, because when I'm going to say it's my son was 19 years old, right around 20 years ago, and he had his first psychotic break, and of course he got arrested first, and then that became a criminal record, and then we finally got the help through my medical insurance that I had at the time. He was given the diagnosis and was told he was going to be this schizoaffective the rest of his life, and he's going to have to be put on these nasty drugs. And so his psychotic break involved violence, okay? And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going on, right? And so, of course, you call in police, and then, of course, it's just spirals from there. And so then all of these entanglements occurred while we get the diagnosis, and then he's forced into treatment because he's now part of the criminal system, right? And then I let him come home, and he's bigger than me at 19. And I'm the one who's supposed to get him to comply, right? Going to a NAMI and all that, family to family. That doesn't work, people. It makes him mad at me. I become the enemy. I'm the one who's going to get him in trouble with the authorities, locked up, right? And we've been force treated many, many times. And the good news is, look, I want you to know we are not chemical beings. We are energy. And quantum physics replaces mind over matter, okay? And we need to take it to a new level, Dr. Coleman. And I agree, I never treat my problems as a shortage of a pharmaceutical because it's profit over people. I don't even go to my doctor anymore for that fact, okay? My son is, the good news is my son, after he spent 4.5 years in locked setting, I brought him home July 24th, 2024 to Bernie, California. They got us IHSS in-home support services. I have a wonderful person. I couldn't have planned it 4.5 years ago. But what I did, I changed my belief in my tactics. I no longer fought the system. I began to go into soteria, mind freedom, quantum physics, my own spiritual strengthening to know that I can achieve anything that I believe I can. And together we can create the soterias of the Garden of Eden of this planet. Okay, and that's the crisis we're facing. We're all in mental health crisis, can't you tell? So we have to inform people, how to self-care and sharing and caring. Sharing is caring. I love you all so much. Sardi and everybody's experience here is valid, and your fear and your terror is valid. And so if we could self-regulate that fear and terror into a new belief that we're here to bring love to every situation, and that when we calm our own neurology, as Dr. Says, we create the biochemistry of all the pharmaceuticals that man has created on the planet, okay? We have all the receptors for them. We create it through our own thoughts and emotions, people, emotions. So Jared is here. Excuse me, maybe this should be confidential. I don't know. He's coming. He's doing fine. Our in-home support provider is the angel that we needed, that I couldn't have planned for. It just unfolded miraculously. I'm here to say there is hope.
Okay, let me interrupt you a little
Through
bit.
the dark tunnels that the
Congratulations.
system presents us.
Yeah, I think you've done a great thing in the fact that you've found a better way to help him and work with him. Now, what we need is more people who know how to do that, how to convince people, how do people get thinking right. And that's where I want to urge people that use my website, because every topic that I've discussed today, I go into, and many others. And if you do that, it's not a website for what most people want. They want entertainment. That's why I don't have many followers, because I never asked for any followers. I didn't know you had to do that. So just get on there, subscribe to it. I don't get any money for that. You don't pay any money. It just means that you will get the material, and it's easier to get. The YouTube likes to shift you to somebody else where there's commercials. So, and if you do that and really absorb everything I talk about in there, you will become more and more powerful as you interact with people. And that's what we need. We need to build a movement, where the numbers begin to shift in our direction a little bit. It's not going to happen in any of our lifetimes, but let's just try to get as close as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And, I just want to add that we can't say it's not going to happen in our lives. I think that we can continue to collaborate, cultivate, and communicate. And I'm just so grateful that we're having these conversations, because I just want to scream at the laptop as everybody, because I think we're all really on the same page. And so I'm just want to celebrate other options. So thank you, Amy, for sharing those. Carolyn, would you like to share? Your hand is up real quick.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
So I'd really like to look at some of the preventions, because my situation was in Washington State for forced treatment, and it was.
hello?
I lost you.
You went on mute, Carolyn.
What is the name of Dr. Coleman's website?
It's there. It's called,
I'm going to put it.
yeah, it's gonna go up there.
You have to say it because not everybody's on the chat.
Oh, okay. So just let me know when it's okay.
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. So I really like to look at some of the prevention, because my cases were in Washington State, and it was for an isolated incident of erratic driving on private property with no people around. And it because I refused and wasn't compliant with taking drugs because I was physically injured, and they said I had psychosis because I was sleep deprived. Well, the resolve for that is sleep. Okay. And so there are already laws on the book. There's already case law. There's already precedent set. We already have these things in this nation. We already have all this, but we have people who don't follow any of these rules. They want to make up their own rules, and they want to do their own thing. And because somebody says they're a psychiatrist, the court really has bent their knee and said, oh my God, you're an expert. And so psychiatry really is not the expert.
Well,
right? And
let me tell you, I think Jim Gottstein is listening. He and I worked together on this, and he has huge legal experience. I have spent a huge percentage of my career going to court to just teach the court these kind of things. Of course, it depends on the judge. It depends on, the skill of the defense attorney, prosecutor.
but it should not depend on the judge. If we already have regulations that say you need to have, and yes, I've spent a little bit of time with Mr. Gottstein as well, not like you have, I'm sure, but we already have regulations on the book that say, you need informed consent, you need to go through the court to have this box check to say you're going to force treatment on somebody. We have these things already in this country. What the problem is nobody's ever enforcing them. And so then we're damaging people. We're damaging people, and we're destroying their lives. And then we're blaming them for the destruction that we're causing, the psychiatry and pharmaceuticals, because it has just become a payer-centered care instead of patient-centered care.
Well,
because
the thing is that when you say we don't need the judge, well, if you don't have the judge, you won't.
I didn't mean we don't need the judge, but I'm just saying there should not. These are constitutional violations. This isn't a state right. These are constitutional violations. So if you're going to be taking somebody's constitutional if you're going to be infringing on their civil liberties, you have to have some kind of education before you're checking the boxes about saying that this person is all psychological. Mine was all a physical injury, and then I'm sure I had some manifestations that were possibly mirrored some mental disorders or something, if you will, but it was nobody wanted to listen, other than when it came to medication management. Everybody fell in line, charge nurses and everything. So there's got to be some type of it can't be one court is one way and another court's another way and another court's another way. We have to have some type of standardization. This is my opinion. We have to have some type of standardization of our language. Well, you can't have 50 different definitions of gravely disabled in one country.
Yeah, I've had so much experiences in the courts, and I've done workshops for prosecutors, for defense attorneys. I've yet to have a judges, they have meetings, judges meet.
Yes.
I've tried to get them to come to some of my presentations. I've not ever had any group of judges decide that they needed to hear from it. So there's reforms in every direction you turn. There's a lot of work to be done, and that would certainly be one of them. If you ever hear of a group of judges who are willing to hear a different point of view about how they should be conducting their business, have them call me up and I'll be glad.
Thank you for sharing that, because I've been in the court as well, not like you have or Mr. Godstein, but I have been in the courts for a while now. And so is that what you'd suggest, is getting with the judges about having a different perspective?
Absolutely. You know, the judges,
Okay.
they don't know that psychiatry can't do these things. They assume, and you know, I've had times where the judge won't even let me testify. I just finished a case, somebody who's going to be writing it up on the Mad in America article. So she wants to put her name, I'll leave that up to her. But the judge would not allow me to testify about the way she was being improperly medicated, or, you know, she was now under the control of the parents and so forth and so on. So yeah, they need it. And the judges, I mean, they're smart people. They don't know, they've not had a chance to think about it. Some of them will be responsive, some won't, but I would.
If I may, how would you go about that?
I would contact the somebody in the courtroom hierarchy, you know, all they have and do it at the county level.
Okay,
Say
like the superior court, right? So you would
court,
actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Contact the, I don't know whether they have a hierarchy of judges, but there's usually some, you know, say, I'm interested in speaking with the staff of the whichever attorney or judge is involved in continuing education. Judges have to get continuing education like everybody else.
Oh, okay.
And then say, you know, could I come down? I'm somebody who's been involved in the system, and I am also in touch with a doctor, and give Godstein's name, an attorney, and we wonder whether they would be interested in a presentation.
So I see that Jim also wants to weigh in on this, Jim Godstein, and we've been throwing his name around. So let's go for it, Jim.
So my experience, I just wanted to mention, maybe I'll mention a couple things, but my experience has been the same, that the judges are not at all interested in hearing what I have to say. And I wrote a law review article called Involuntary Commitment, Forced Drugging in the Trial Court's Rights Violations as a Matter of Course. And I had it published in the Alaska Law Review where I practiced, because that went to every single judge in the state. And I heard bupkas from anybody. And other people have tried to say, oh, you know, maybe, you know, Jim Godstein, you need to have Jim Godstein talk to you, and never had any interest in that. So that's kind of a larger conversation. One other thing I want to say, which I'm kind of a broken record on, is that there is this federal program called the Protection Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness Act, called the PAMI Act, and they fund an army of lawyers, and their congressional charge, this is a federal law, is to ensure the rights of individuals with mental illness, I mean, it's not the greatest language, are protected. And they're required to have this advisory council and jointly determine the priorities. And those councils have a lot of power on paper, but they've just been really, I don't know, anyway, suppressed by the protection advocacy agencies. And Psych Rights has established this PAMI Advisory Council Empowerment Project, and we're to try and get good people on those councils and force the protection advocacy agencies to do their job. And we're having a meeting on November 20th by Zoom. I think it's 6:30 Eastern time, where we're going through all that. So I put a link to that earlier in the chat. I think I'll do it do another one.
But let me just add that even though Jim has not had any luck and I've never been invited, it only takes once, I think, one person that you find and it happens, the word gets out, and then it's not as scary for the judges to say, okay, maybe we need to do this. So I wouldn't just toss an idea out completely.
Oh, no, absolutely not. And the other thing, I'm a broken record on that too, is this report on improving mental health outcomes, which just goes into the abysmal results and harmful nature of current psychiatric process. And this should be, I think, the guidepost for all the defense counsel who's, in my public defender types of public pretenders, as they're called, who I think their actual role is, in almost all cases, is just to check the box that the person had a lawyer before their rights were taken away.
What is the phone number for Dr. Coleman, please?
I think what you have to do is contact my website and they will pass along. If I give out my phone number, I could be swamped.
You're right. Thank you so much.
How about if I
anybody else-
email? I'll email Dr. Attorney Gottstein.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Jim. Jim and I honestly can't beat that Pammy drum enough, because there seems to be an issue with actually addressing abuse and neglect, and maybe, having some legal action. So I would encourage anybody to come and join that meeting, because it is a way to engage locally. And possibly some of them may have attorney education, judge education. I do know there's a couple states that do those kinds of programs. So through the P&A. So thank you so much. Anybody else? I don't see any hands right this moment. Go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to share. You got a question? Oh, wow. Courtney, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a quick question about anosognosia and, I guess, your opinions on
Good
that.
one.
We just, I'm in Maryland, and they just passed a AOT law this year, which obviously most other states already have. But it's one of the things I'm noticing is not just the impacts that the law has had, because it hasn't gone into effect, but the impacts it's having on advocacy. Now, all of a sudden, when we try to speak up, it's like all the peers and people with lived experience are basically told that we don't know what we're talking about, and that we have mental illnesses, and they don't, so they know what we need. So I guess I'm wondering your opinions on it, both clinically, but also the intent of it.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in, even though I know Amy has the hand up, but anagnosia, is that what you're talking about?
Anosognosia. That's right.
Anagnosia.
Correct. Yeah,
Anosognosia.
anosognosia.
Okay, so
Lack of insight.
I come out of the movement of working with people with physical disabilities, and that was a notion that came from people who had strokes, and they didn't realize that their arm wouldn't work. That's really what that meant. And maybe that was true, maybe that wasn't true. And then Treatment Advocacy Center and some other folks applied it with no data, no research behind it, to people with psychiatry, and said, and it's just like that, except instead of not knowing your arm doesn't work, you don't know that your brain doesn't work.
But this is something that
It's a made up thing.
Yeah, this is a label that is being used as a psychiatric illness.
But it's not.
Of course it's not. I'm looking on my phone right now.
But
Unawareness of one's own illness.
Made up. It's made up.
Yeah,
But,
of
but the
course.
concern is that it's being weaponized. And I can tell you firsthand, I've actually experienced that in a very dangerous way. Where when your advocacy gets too loud and touches too far, they will absolutely hurl, and it's very weaponized. And I think that we're treading in some very dangerous territory. So I just appreciate this getting brought up.
Let me
So
give you,
let me say one last thing about
let me
this.
give
I
you a
really
quick-
should say this, and then you're in, Lee.
I-
It's made up, and they need
Can you
to.
elaborate?
they
Can you
need-
elaborate on the dangerous, what the dangerous territory is, please?
Well, let me just. give you
Sorry.
a comparison. This anosognosia is a fraud that I'm reminded of another fraud. I'm reading on Wikipedia right now, drapetomania. I'm sure nobody ever heard of that.
No, I haven't.
drapetomania was a proposed mental illness that in 1851, American physician Samuel Cartwright hypothesized as the cause of enslaved Africans fleeing captivity. This hypothesis was based on the belief that slavery was such an improvement upon the lives of slaves that only those suffering from some form of mental illness would wish to escape. So that's, I would say, anosognosia, when applied not to a legitimate neurological patient, but a person with emotional problems, would be on the level of drapetomania.
So
I would agree, and I think the answer to the question is to let people know there's no scientific basis in it, and it was made up basically by the Treatment Advocacy Center, who was trying to have forced treatment. And I know I got hands, so I'm sure people are disagreeing with me.
no, I just want to answer where it's dangerous, Susan, because
Thank you.
It's
at 9
because we don't tell them the scientific fact. It's made up. We need to tell them. That's the defense. It's made up. There's no scientific basis for it.
There's no test for MI, none whatsoever. There's no
No.
blood test, scans, no nothing.
Family
That's part of where it becomes very dangerous, and somebody can just
family members made it up. I'm not saying, it's not that I don't, I'm heartfelt for families, but they made it up because they didn't know what to do with their adult children who were experiencing something, and they stole a concept. It goes back to, I'm just going to say it, treatment tack, the bad tack. There's two tacks. The bad tack, who used it to lock up family members, and it's made up. And now I'm going to stop. Sorry, I cannot.
Thank you. So, okay, I'm muting you now. Okay. Okay, there we go. I muted her. So, I just very quickly want to say that it's being weaponized, okay? Because if you really are, speaking up and speaking loud in truth, right, they get intimidated. And the way it can get weaponized is, first and foremost, I'm going to share with somebody brought up prevention. An advanced directive, that needs to be your prevention plan. You need to have one, because if you're loud, they will come knocking on your door with 988 resources. And that is exactly the diagnostic label they will use and the wording they will use. So I can absolutely share with you firsthand experience that you need to be prepared. If you're going to speak up, stand up, yell out, and cause a little bit of eyes to be opened and ears to hear, and they're going to want to silence you. And so they are now using this diagnostic as an oppressive silencer. And so protect yourself. And I recommend that everybody have a psychiatric advance directive, a mental health advance directive on hand and always up to date according to your state's, because 988 has to respond to that. They must.
The tool is to understand that there's no scientific fact, and we have three hands. So I got Amy and Tara and Carolyn.
Well, I just wanted to address some of what I found to be helpful because, see, the forced treatment really brings up the violence and the fear and the hypervigilance in people. And then they're afraid of everybody. And I want to say that there is some disorganized language and communication. And if I didn't know my son pre-birth, I could understand why people would find him different and hard to communicate. And the fact of the matter is, when people are released from treatment for locked settings, there are no real rehabilitative places for them to go to and to be accepted as they are. I'm sorry if my internet is unstable. So, you know, being with people, as Soteria says, right? Not doing to and talking about them. And I've also found that diet is very important. Low carb is very important because sugar is detrimental to brain function. And if you become fat adapted, please learn about fat adapted. It's a much cleaner fuel, and your body has a chance to clear out the garbage and the stress hormones. Constant chronic stress will lead to psychotic breaks. And we are self-healing beings, never forget that. And so if you can't come home to a safe, understanding, loving environment, you're going to repeat the same patterns that bring up the same mental thoughts and behaviors, including violence. That's been my experience. And with a man who is quite capable as a caregiver, let me add, and we are in a safe home. I'm not fighting with my son over how many cigarettes he's smoking, but we're, no, there's no fights here. There's communication and negotiate erratic thoughts and activities that could arise as I work with his psychiatrist in Florida that they assigned to us, video, to lower his meds. And I immediately got him off the statins and the diabetes meds when he was released that they had him on, and he looked like he was 9 months pregnant. And we lowered his stress level. We eat whole foods. We are walking pretty much every day. Diet, lifestyle, and mental stress reduction is truly how to approach when we have these symptoms, of unease and dis-ease. That's how I approach my life. And I bring love to every situation. Thank you again for giving me time.
Oh, thank you.
And again, we need resources to help people coming out. That is sorely lacking. What is available is contributing more to the instability, okay? And like you said, the psychotic meds increased, the more meds to treat the side effects. It's a toxic cesspool. So yeah, we're fighting against that. Thank you so much, Dr. Coleman and everybody.
Amy. And I see another hand, Tara, I think.
Yeah, just quickly, not to change the subject, but I've been familiar with these very expensive treatment centers that parents often, or wealthy people, pay to put their family members in. And I was told I was going voluntary to a place in Washington State called We Level Up, and it was absolutely horrific. My wealthy ex-husband was going to pay $32,000 a month to have me locked up in this facility. I went wet AMA after 30 hours, 30 miserable hours of being imprisoned. They told me when I went in it was voluntary, and that was a lie. And so there's another organization called Windhorse that also seems to have very predatory behaviors. They talked my 21-year-old daughter into trying to get me admitted there at $32,000 a month that her daddy was going to pay half of. And I'm sort of beside myself because it's this wealthy, it's the wealthy people's way of locking up their family members. And it's not kind and it's not helpful. And I'm just wondering if anybody else has experience with these kind of programs. The one in Washington State took insurance, and I was told that insurance companies were reimbursing at a rate of $4,500 a day. And it was a hell location. It was not at all luxury, and they were not giving good care.
If I may interject something here, if I may. there, what opened the door more to involuntary commitment in Washington State was Ricky's Law, which was allowing family members to say, you know, there's it was kind of like an intervention of family members being involved. But this really opened the door to more than the 72 hours, because then it became 5 days. And so if you're looking at 5 days, you're going to look at a weekend. So you're already going to look at a whole entire week before
Yeah,
you're going to get to talk
can
to
I just
somebody.
interrupt again? Because
Yeah, sure.
someone's said something about Windhorse, and I want to go back to this
Oh, yes, please
wealthy
do.
commitment.
Oh,
Yeah,
geez.
Windhorse. The one thing that I wanted to say about Windhorse, I've heard very good things about them, but the fact that they convinced my 21-year-old daughter to agree to try to get me to go inpatient there when I couldn't have even come close to affording it felt predatory to me. The Windhorse representatives spoke with my daughter and my ex-husband about the cost of the program before they even broached the subject with me, which is illegal. They can't talk to my ex-husband about my healthcare. They can't even talk to my daughter about my healthcare. That's why I have a problem with Windhorse. I'm sure the program is helpful, and I've heard that it's helpful, but at $32,000 a month, there have to be better alternatives for people.
It's mixed at best.
I don't know what that means, mixed at best.
Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped in, but I think Windhorse, they bill themselves as, you know, really helping people get off the meds, but whenever things get rough, they.
But at what cost? Who can afford
right.
$32,000 a month? I mean,
Exactly.
this is what's insane to me.
Yeah,
I'm
but and they don't even do what they, you know,
my
they
daughter's a
say.
millionaire and I'm on Medicaid, and this is what is happening to people who are they're family members of very, very wealthy people. Wealthy people do not put themselves in Windhorse. They put their family members in Windhorse, and it's abusive, I believe. I don't know. But We Level Up in Washington was 100% abuse.
A 90-day cruise, a 90-day around the world cruise with 2 around the clock nurses to accompany you probably would be cheaper.
Exactly.
I love that you said that. Anyway.
I know that
And more effective.
someone was with their companion, and it was not for 90 days, it was for 30 days.
So Carolyn has had a hand up for quite a while, I think.
If I can, I wanted to get with, is it Kat? Oh, I'm trying to remember your name. I'm sorry. Where'd she go? Anyway, but about the dangerousness. Could you speak about that, Dr. Coleman, about the dangerousness and how they want everybody to be you know, categorized as dangerous, because then
the point is that danger is a prediction. If you're doing something, then you're violent. That's a matter of law enforcement. But they're talking about, they think somebody is going to do something. Well, we've had data since the 1960s proving that psychiatrists are especially bad at deciding whether somebody's dangerous.
So true.
In fact, when they did some studies at the methodology, the names escape me now because it goes back a long ways. They looked at people who were released from state mental institutions because it was felt they were no longer dangerous. So therefore, they could, for the first time, test whether or not they actually did anything. Before that, if they were felt to be dangerous, they weren't released, so you couldn't never know. And what they found is that the people who were said to be dangerous were those who were young and those who were Black. So clearly the psychiatrists were doing things which is just part of a societal, leftover from the old days, and maybe still, there are more poor Black people than poor whites and so forth. In their minds, well, those are the people that I don't think I would want to take a chance on. That's the level of non-science that was going on. So we have a long track record of demonstrating psychiatrists are, as ever, the worst people that we should ask, the worst. And actually, there should be nobody who's doing anything to you because you're said to be dangerous. Either you've done something which calls for intervention, and we all need that. We need police. We need people need to be held sometimes, but it has nothing to do with psychiatry. And by the way, if let's say somebody did end up in an institution, prison or jail, there's no reason psychiatric services couldn't be offered to those people, but there would have no connection to the prison sentence. The legal consequences of what you did would still be there. The person who is locked up would then possibly want to get help if it's really something they want.
Yeah,
And so suddenly you might have more treatment offered for the right reasons, and society would not be prevented from protecting itself if necessary. So sometimes there are solutions which actually appear to be contradictory, but they can work out. Again, these things are not going to happen right away. But anyway, the bottom line is psychiatry is well known to be worse than useless in that role.
I see Sarah has a hand, and Carolyn, and thank you, Dr. Coleman.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Coleman.
Okay.
I have a question.
Carolyn, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to kind of chime in with, what you were saying about that. Now I kind of drew a blank. And but yeah, it's the dangerousness standard that the self-harm and self-harm to self and others in case law transfers to dangerous. And
well,
so
yeah, I've seen so many of those. When I remember I said I was head of this crisis unit for a couple of years. And so I would look at these in California. It's the Lanterman-Petrus Short Act 5150, they call it. And they would check off a box because they had to check off at least one box. Now, if there was nothing obvious about unable to provide for their physical needs, there was nothing obvious about suicide, then they would check off the box dangerous. When I would actually read the form, there wasn't anything there to support it at all. It was just the box, because then the cop knows, well, I dropped the person off, I've dropped off the slip, and they can get back to their job. The cops they hated that kind of work. They just wanted to get on with catching real people. But, if the person is doing something, or maybe the family called them, they would check it off. So what I did is I just did the best I can to get them out of there if I saw it was like that. And most of the staff was with me on that. So but I'll tell you, there's another thing. You know what would happen? As soon as I did that, the staff, like social workers and aides, they would say, we'd have a meeting after, say, oh, so-and-so, and we think they're ready to go. But I put them on SSI. And they thought they were doing them a favor. They thought they were doing them a favor. Get them some money. Well, the money might have helped, but you know what you have to get SSI? A mental disorder which prevents you from working. Now, that is not really help somebody.
Oh, I didn't know that was one of the criteria for SSI, because I know people that are injured that actually have SSI, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for physical reasons. But if you have a mental problem, once you're put on SSI, you're reevaluated in a year. Well, many of us would very quickly get addicted to getting a paycheck without having to do anything because we have a mental disorder, a label. So it brings out the worst in a person's ability to become self-sustaining. So in the name of helping them, we are doing something which really doesn't help them. We want to give them the support they need, get them back on their feet, and then try to help them get a job.
Yeah. If I can, do you know when our law changed to say, like, if I have a broken arm in the United States of America and I want to walk around with a broken arm, which is pretty stupid actually, but if I want to walk around with a broken arm, nobody's going to stop me and say, I'm going to force you to go to the hospital and get your arm fixed. No one's going to do that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so where did we get off the rails here about saying that just because somebody's behavior is erratic with driving, or you had psychosis because you haven't slept, that all of a sudden that qualifies somebody to force treat somebody against their bodily autonomy?
It goes way, way back. You know, it used to be in the old days before we had any legal regulations. Two doctors simply said, in our opinion, this person needs treatment. That's all it took. They came up with the dangerousness standard as a reform.
Oh, is that what? Yeah, I've done some research about that dangerousness.
And it is better that we have it. At least we have a framework that theoretically could work. In the old days, and that's a perfect thing for the family. I mean, a lot of women, a husband decides, you know, I don't like her, what she's doing anymore. They decide to just call the doctor. The doctor calls another doctor and they say, okay, we'll send her off to the funny farm. Yeah. So
Okay.
there's a history of psychiatry is worth studying. It's not pretty.
Yeah. Thank you so much.